So this will be our lesson on the spinal column, and our skeleton here is Elvis, and he is going to help illustrate some of the things that are going on in our bodies. A skeleton is an amazing architecture of the human body, and in the spinal column alone is a wonderful series of 26 vertebrae, places where things can connect and where they can move apart. So the spine integrates and it also separates. It has wonderful curves. The first one we're going to look at is up here at the neck. And this is an inward turning curve. So there's a nice little depression here. And what I find so interesting about the neck, the vertebra in the neck, is that it comes all the way up to your ears. So if you're to do this, you're actually, if your fingers were to meet, they'd be meeting at a vertebra. We often don't use this part of the neck. We don't even know it's there. As we move down the back, we go into what's called the thoracic part of the spine. And this part of the spine has to deal with the ribs, which makes it a more dense part of the spine. It has less mobility. So we want to spend a little more time focusing on the movements here, trying to create more movement. The neck has an awful lot of movement, and this part of the spine has very little movement. And then as we go down, we have the lumbar spine. And this part also curves in just like the neck. So sometimes if there are problems in the neck, we could look to the lower back. And sometimes if there are problems in the lower back, we can look to the neck. They have a nice relationship. So this part of the spine curves in, and it's a really bulky part of the spine. It takes up most of the space from head to tail, as compared to the other two parts. As we move a little further down, we have the sacrum, which is a bunch of fused vertebrae, ending with the tailbone. So those are our curves. And when we're doing yoga or any kind of movement, we want to have a balanced action. But we tend to move from the more mobile parts of the spine. So we'll tend to move more from the neck, or maybe more from the lower back, leaving out the movement in the thoracic part of the spine, again, because it's connected to the rib cage. The next thing I want to look at is what is contained inside the bones of the spine. And here we have the nervous system, our spinal nerves. So the bones are really there to protect the nerves of the spine, which go all the way up to the brain and all the way down to the tail. And normally, it does a really nice job of this, but when there's imbalance, sometimes we feel things like a pinched nerve in the neck or sciatica in the lower back. If he were a real person, if Elvis was a real guy, he would have a long tail of nerves here. So there's lots of opportunity for the nerves to come through these two bones and get a pinch, which is what we call sciatica. This doesn't feel very good. So when we're working with a balanced spine, we won't have these issues. We can loosen up the connection of the joints and the bones from the pelvis to the sacrum and create space and flowing movement. One last thing I'd like to look at is this, again, this section, this thoracic section of the spine. If you can see, the spinous processes back here, these sticky outy things, are very, very long. They're longer here than they are here or up here. So when we go into a back bend, they can actually bang into each other quite quickly, and we feel stuck in our backward bend. So it becomes essential to elongate the spine when we're twisting or when we're back bending. So back bending is much less about bending back than it is about extending and imagining that you're curling over something. So now we're going to look at those same ideas on a real live body. Taylor's here to help us. So as Taylor comes into a spinal twist, if she's not paying so much attention, she might move from a more flexible part of her spine, which is the part that's at the neck. Now she'll come back to center, and she'll remember to elongate the spine, so she'll feel a beautiful lift, and then she'll turn from the lower back, elongating again to create the space between the vertebra, and from her middle back, elongating even more, turning at the shoulders, and then the last thing to turn is the neck. Undo, and show us again if you weren't paying so much attention. We can see the angle of her shoulders here. Come back to center, elongate the spine, turn from the lower back, elongating the spine again, the middle back, the upper back, and then she turns at the head. And you can see that she's in a much deeper, more balanced spinal twist. This brings incredible health to the spine and also stimulates the nervous system. Okay, you can undo and come into cat-cow position, please. This is another pose where we tend to work the more flexible part of the spine. So she's going to lift her head and tail, and you'll see that she's got a lot of work going on here in her lower back. We call this the lumbar spine. Too much, in fact. So she's going to round, coming into cat pose. She'll draw her navel toward the spine, and then she'll come back into cow pose, stilling the lower back. So she's going to create some stability here so she can create a little bit more mobility between the shoulder blades. This, again, is the part of the spine that's connecting to the rib cage. So it doesn't like to move so much. It has a lot of work to do connecting to the ribs and itself. So here we can see a little bit more movement when she stills the lower back. She can round again. And we'll see again where she goes if she doesn't pay too much attention. She'll lift her head, lift her tail, and collapse in the lower back. Way too much mobility here. So we'll have her round again. She'll tone at the tummy, and then try to create more movement at the mid-back, the thoracic spine. Seeing the difference here, there's more stillness here and more mobility here. Okay. And then come into a neutral spine and push back to pose of the child. The next pose we'll do is downward dog. And downward dog is a lot of stretching in the hips and the shoulders, but oftentimes we forget about the movement in the spine, and really for me, downward dog is a spinal elongation. So come back onto your hands and knees and come into downward dog from your joints. So here, Taylor's just hinging from her arms and her legs. She's just moving here, and there's not so much activity going on over here. Come back down to your knees. She's going to keep her knees bent and a little bend in the elbows, so she's stabilizing the joints. So there's not going to be so much movement in her joints, so it's going to create the movement in the spine. Okay, keep your elbows and knees bent and stretch your tailbone up to the sky, lengthening, 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 as if her tail was reaching all the way up to the sky, stretching all the way through here, and then she can straighten the arms and straighten the legs once she's gotten the spinal length. Lower back down to the knees. Show the first way again. Okay, you can see even a collapse in her spine here, and we'll show the second way. There's a bend in the elbows to still the shoulders, a bend in the knees to still the hips. And then she'll reach her tail like someone's pulling the tip of her tail up, 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 and the collapse is gone and the elongation is there. She can let her head drop, and she's in a wonderful balanced downward dog. Come down to pose of the child. And rest there. So it's essential to make sure that the full length of your spine is moving in any asana. The next pose we'll do is a lateral pose, Parsvakonasana. So let's come up to stand. And step your left foot forward and your right foot back. And then take the arms out wide. And warrior two, and then bring your elbow onto the knee. Left hand to your hip. So oftentimes I see here again people trying to turn into the pose and they just turn from the head. So they look up at the shoulder and there's no activity going on here. So it's not a balanced action because everything is happening at the cervical spine. Turn back to center. Now watch from the lower back, she's going to turn her tummy a bit so she gets mobility here. Then her middle spine, then her shoulder, then her head. Now she's in a full and complete pose from tailbone to the crown of her head. So there's one long line of energy of movement going on here. Come up to stand and step to the front of the mat. Tadasana. So they say, the yogis say that if we can master Tadasana, we can become enlightened. So this is really a pose to work on. Typically what I see in class is that people have a very large curve in the lower back here. So there's a big lordosis and the belly is hanging forward. Essentially that means that the organs are coming forward and the lower back is crunching. So when we talk about zipping up the navel, we're actually not talking about such a strong abdominal action as a gripping, but we're talking about realigning, finding balance. So she'll bring her fingertip to the bottom of the navel and her other hand to her lower back. She lifts the bottom of the navel up and elongates the tailbone. She's coming into a balanced action. Now let all that go and bring your hands to prayer. We can see that now she has the lordosis in the spine and that her organs are spilling forward. So this is not a balanced action. Again, if she lifts up from the pit of the navel and elongates the tail, we're back to the spinal support. We're back to the middle of the body. Now keep your hands where they are and step back with your left foot for Warrior One. In many classes, we go into Warrior One quite quickly because we repeat the pose over and over. But in this DVD, you'll see that we're going to go in very slowly because there's so many wonderful rotations here. So the first thing I'm going to ask Tyler to do is straighten her front leg. This enables her to again lengthen the tailbone and lift the belly. Once that action has happened, she can begin to square the hips, drawing her back hip forward and her right hip back. Keeping the hands at the chest, she starts to back bend, lifting the tummy and the heart. And then she can inhale, take the arms out, all the way to the sides, and up. And again, she has a balanced action from the tip of her tail to the crown of her head. Bring the arms to the sides, and release. And come into Warrior One. So oftentimes I find that people come into this pose very quickly with not a lot of awareness. And it's such a beautiful pose with incredible rotations and spirals and wonderful possibility for elongation of the spine. It's a hip opener, it's a back bend, it's a spinal extension, it's a shoulder opener. And all of these things become unrealized when we're not doing it slowly and consciously. So bring your arms by your side, step forward again. And then take a wider step back with your left leg. Good. Bring your hands to a prayered position and begin to straighten your front leg. With the front leg straight, she can one more time drop her tail and lift her belly to bring the spine into balance. From there, she can begin to square the hips, finding the hip opener here, bringing the hip of the back leg forward and the hip of the front leg back. So there's balance here. Her hips are like headlights facing straight ahead. Holding all that, she can begin to descend the front thigh, feeling the hip opener here. Keeping the tail long and the belly lifted, the arms come out wide to the sides for shoulder opening. The sternum lifts as the tailbone drops, and now she's in a beautiful back bend. The pose is complete and balanced. Bring the arms to your sides and step forward. So as we move through our yoga practice, we want to make sure that we're bringing awareness to the entire spine and to all the movements in the asanas. So it's not an exercise, but an exercise in awareness.